It is that time of year where we're in a bit of a lull, at least for the Bulls anyway, not the NBA at large, but a lull in waiting on the draft lottery to see where the Bulls fall, which is why I've been holding off on doing any draft prospect videos. We're in the middle of the playoffs, so obviously trades, contract extensions, all that stuff is more or less on hold to see how things shake out in the postseason, to see which teams are going to be the most desperate come the offseason. And so, of course, with things a little quiet on the Bulls front, what better time than to do another hot takes video? I had asked you all to leave your hottest Bulls takes on the channel community page as well as on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, by the way, at BullsCentralYT, and I got a lot of responses in just a few hours. So I'm going to try and get through as many as I can, but also know that some of them were similar in nature, so I had to go with just one. And apologies if I didn't get to your take, but I promise I'll do more of these in the future. But anyway, let's get into some of these, shall we? So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. This first one comes to us from Karina Martin. The Bulls will do a sign and trade with the Clippers for Paul George, sending Zach to LA. Huge move coming this summer. So Paul George has been in the news recently. Obviously, everyone knows that he has a player option in the final year of his deal with the Clippers and is looking for a max contract extension. The word is the Clippers have made multiple offers to him slightly below the max, and he has declined said offers. Those are rumors, of course, but if true, that means Paul George, again, wants a max contract extension and nothing less than that. And while I do think PG is an upgrade from Zach LaVine and would prefer him on a max deal over someone like Zach, I just don't know that it really helps the Bulls out all that much. Not only that, but you're talking about potentially setting the Bulls back even further, signing Paul George to a max deal when he just turned 34 years old. You're going to sign both DeMar and Paul George at 34 to long-term contracts, high annual amount extensions. Just doesn't really make a ton of sense to me. Also, the other thing you have to consider here is, would the Clippers really want Zach LaVine? The other thing you have to consider here is, would the Clippers want Zach LaVine? Now, maybe they're going to be a little desperate with the new stadium that they have built and they want to keep the fans interested. And it's good to get something in return for Paul George than losing him for nothing in free agency, but I just don't see that being the play for them when they likely could get better sign and trade offers if they go exploring that route. And the other thing is, in a sign and trade, is Paul George going to agree on that deal? He has to agree on the contract extension and which team he's going to be going to. I don't see a world how Paul George would want to go to the Bulls at this stage in his career when he's looking to win a championship. I might have to do a separate video on this topic alone because I've seen it come up more and more recently as Bulls fans wanting Paul George on this roster. Next up, we've got Malik Carson. That missed timeout on Blatt in 2015 set us back a decade. They make that call and the Bulls likely make it to the finals that year. We most likely end up keeping Rose and Butler much longer together, and we never go full rebuild. It's funny because I actually think I did a video specifically on this missed timeout about a year ago because that game still haunts me to this day. Now, a few things. We still don't know if the Bulls would have actually gone on to win that series. Winning that game would have only put them up 3-1, but I do agree I don't see the Bulls blowing a 3-1 lead to the Cavs in that series, but just saying. And then, of course, the Bulls would have faced the Hawks in the conference finals, which, yeah, that team was fool's gold, and the Cavs would go on to sweep them anyway. So most likely, yeah, the Bulls go to the finals, even though they would have lost to the Golden State Warriors. But yeah, I mean, going to the finals would have changed that whole trajectory of the franchise, because they most likely would not have fired Tom Thibodeau. They would have kept the crew together longer and would have tried to push in putting win-now talent around the guys, knowing they were right there, almost winning it all. Just a really, really unfortunate missed call. Next up, we've got Brady Huber. Bulls decide to run it back with the same group. Hopefully this is a hot take. Man, I honestly don't even know if it's a hot take at this point. I mentioned this before, but if the Bulls do in fact re-sign DeMar to a big extension as well as Patrick Williams, they literally will not be able to make further changes from there. It's still unclear whether they'll be able to trade Zach LaVine, so if things go down this route, yeah, it's possible you could be looking at the same group on opening night. I do think it's unlikely. I think you'll see some change. It just might not be the change that we're all hoping for. Before I get into the next take, though, let's do a quick ad break, of course, for our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. For those that aren't familiar with Underdog, let me tell you about the app real quick. My personal favorite that I use on the app, again, as always, NBA Pick'ems. With Pick'ems, you can pick higher or lower on most player stats and win money based on the ones you get right. You can pick higher or lower and win up to 100 times your money in a single night if you do 5 pick'ems and you get them all right. It used to be 20 times, now it's 100 times. And guys, they're offering viewers of this channel an exclusive offer. If you use the promo code BullsCentral, you'll get your first deposit doubled up to $100. Who doesn't want free money? It's really that easy. It's also a great way to support the channel as well. I'll leave a link to the site and the code in the description if you're interested, and let me know what picks you guys end up making. Next, we've got Axel Isin. Bulls trade Zach for Donovan Mitchell. Well, this might not be as hot as most people think, but the biggest challenge in this one is the Bulls are going to have to attach assets to a trade to get Donovan Mitchell, which we know they don't have many. They need to include either a first rounder or potentially one of their young guys, or maybe even Alex Caruso if his value is still that high. And then the other thing you have to consider is Donovan Mitchell potentially being on an expiring deal going into this upcoming season, as the final year of his contract is a player option, which I suspect he's going to decline to re-up for more money. Do the Bulls even want to do that? I think most will agree that Donovan Mitchell is a better player than Zach LaVine, but Donovan Mitchell is a very ball-dominant, high-volume scorer who is very ISO heavy. Does that sound like the kind of player we as Bulls fans want to see with the way we've been seeing things the last couple of seasons? Now, maybe that's still a better option than just trading Zach to dump his salary and not getting much in return, but taking on Donovan Mitchell is also a big risk in that you either have to be prepared to pay him a max contract in a couple of seasons or risk him walking in free agency and then you just give up assets that you included in that Zach LaVine trade deal. Next, we've got T-Mac. Lonzo Ball would not have saved this team. Fully healthy, we are a second-round knockout. I actually agree with that. Like, had Lonzo never gotten injured, the Bulls are, of course, a better team and for sure a playoff team, but the fact that they were the #1 seed for a period of time when Lonzo was healthy and the team looked great, I hate to say it, but I didn't view them as like this title contending team with Lonzo Ball. They were beating a lot of bad teams, they couldn't beat the best teams, and there were still flaws to that roster. I think their overall ceiling was a conference finals team, again, at best. Now, had Lonzo stayed healthy and you saw the potential, maybe they would have been more aggressive in putting pieces in place to get them over the top and actually paying the luxury tax, but I agree, even if they had stayed healthy and you just kept the roster as is, yeah, a second round exit team sounds about right. Granted, I would take that any day compared to what we're seeing right now. Next up, we've got my guy, local Bulls fan. Ayo will average 20 points per game next season, and then he doubled down on it even further in a reply saying he'll do it on 40, 50, 90 shooting splits and over 5 threes per game. Listen, that's a hot take, but it's not out of the question. And it's all dependent on what the Bulls do this offseason. Like, if they let DeMar walk, they trade Zach LaVine, or even if just one of those two happens, that opens up a host of opportunities for Ayo on the offensive end, which we saw last season when Zach missed a good portion of the year. Like, if you remember, it started becoming commonplace to see Ayo putting up 20 points towards the end of the season. He was setting career highs multiple times. Dude averaged near 17 points per game post All-Star break, and that was over a 23-game span. Now, the shooting splits, I don't see that happening. Yeah, Ayo actually finished the season shooting 50% and 40% from 3 and 81% from the line, which is insane considering his shooting splits from last season, but those efficiency numbers fell a bit when his minutes and usage went up in order for him to get to 20 points per game. He's going to have to be putting up a lot more shots, and that's going to be incredibly hard to do on those types of splits. But yeah, if the Bulls bring back DeMar and they keep Zach LaVine, Vooch is still starting, then no, Ayo isn't going to average 20 points per game. He's not going to have the opportunity to do so. I can see it though if the Bulls truly pivot and go the youth movement route. Next up, we've got LaVine Muse. The Nikola Vucevic trade in retrospect is not as bad as most people depict. Now, I think we lost that trade, but Wendell is still nowhere close to the player Vucevic is. Anthony Black has yet to show the player he really is, so really, our only loss was Franz, to be honest. Well, one quick clarifying point. The pick that we sent to the Magic in the past draft in 2023 was actually the 11th pick, which they used to take Jet Howard, who barely played this season and was in the G League a lot. Black was their own selection at number 6. But as far as the trade, what I'll say is this, because I feel like we've talked about this trade at length ever since it was made. It was not a good trade in hindsight. The Bulls lost the trade. There's no getting around that. But I've said so many times before, at the time of the trade, no one was talking about how the Bulls overpaid for Vucevic. 2 first-round picks and a young player who wasn't working in Chicago for an all-star player who was putting up 24 and 12 and shooting 40% from 3 on high volume, a floor-spacing big who can score in the post and crash the boards, something the Bulls desperately needed at that time. Yeah, that cost 2 first-round picks and a young player. Obviously, it didn't work out because of all the future moves that came after that, and then Vucevic all of a sudden seemingly forgetting how to shoot it from the three-point line after being one of the best shooting bigs in the NBA. So yeah, in hindsight, it was a bad trade. And I also don't think the way to look at it is, well, look at who turned out from those picks. Because we don't know who the Bulls would have selected at 8 or at 11 in 2023. So yes, the trade was bad. It didn't work out for the Bulls. I'm sure they would take it back if they could. But the trade wasn't bad or as bad at the time considering Vucevic's value, and given Vucevic has still been a productive player, it hasn't been as bad as some fans make it out to be, like it was one of the worst trades in NBA history. Next up, we've got Monta Ellis. Ayo is actually the future of the team, and next year he's going to take a leap that we've been expecting from Patrick Williams. I actually like this take because, as I've said before, as impressive as Coby White's jump this past season was in finishing runner-up in the Most Improved Player of the Year voting, which I still think he should have won, but in my view, Ayo had a more impressive season year over year. We saw Coby improving from last year going into this season, and Ayo had regressed the year before. And what made him more impressive was just how much Ayo improved his shot and his overall efficiency on offense. He was overall a much more efficient offensive player than Coby White was on the season overall, just on fewer attempts and lower usage, of course. But we also forget that Ayo is a stud on the defensive end of the ball. I mean, look, if Ayo can really take his offense to the next level, like we talked about, putting up over 20 points per game while maintaining his high-level defense, yeah, I can see him having a more promising future than someone like Coby White, who I think most Bulls fans are seeing Coby as the future of this franchise currently. But if Ayo takes that leap on offense, watch out. I'll end it there, guys, for this edition of Your Bulls Hot Takes. I'll be sure to have more of these throughout the offseason. Let me know your thoughts on some of these takes that were covered. And of course, as always, be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.